Nireshaliya. Well, the local government elections, the long-awaited third election over this short period of time is tomorrow. So that's great news, and hopefully all of you will be going out there and voting for whomever you feel is the right choice. But with the election being tomorrow, we are within the 48-hour silent period. So we can't really talk about parties or politicians, which is why my guest this evening is not a politician. She is in fact Deepanjalie Abeywardana, head of Verite Media and Politics and Deputy Director of Verite Research. Good evening and welcome, Deepanjalie.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right. So this silent period, which many take for granted, underlines to me the importance of getting the correct information out to the public and for the public to digest that information correctly. So we live in an age when social media has taken over everything, and everybody's putting messages out there. Hundreds of millions of messages going out around the world every day. But what's true, what's false, what's misinformation and disinformation, how do we figure this out, and the importance of it? So could we have a few words from you on the importance of this, Deepanjalie?
Thank you very much for having me here once again. Mis and disinformation are phenomenon that are not entirely new, and they're not unique to Sri Lanka. I'd like to, in fact, use the word information disorder to speak of mis and disinformation, mainly because there are issues with regard to the way mis and disinformation have been defined. So the way misinformation is defined is to say that that is harm that is caused without an intention. So you may actually not know that you are circulating misinformation, and you may be actually an innocent spreader of misinformation because you forward something really thinking that this is not something false. On the other hand, disinformation is something that is said to be done intentionally. But who are we to really evaluate or assess whether there was this this means or the motive or this specific, like the real purpose behind it, whether this was done intentionally or not intentionally? How are we to really, get an idea about whether that was something done with intention or not is a problem. Therefore, we prefer to use the term information disorder to refer to all these categories that also includes malinformation. So to speak about this specific issue of information disorder in the context of election, and also in even without an election, is quite critical, because we see the prevalence of this issue not just in the social media space where people think that it is happening, but also in the mainstream media space. So as far as in 2018, we have published this report, Verite Media Research Division, that really also shows that some of the mainstream media is also the manufacturer and disseminator of information disorder. So you're right, we are right ahead of the election. It's only a few hours away. And there's so much of information out there which may be spread with a motive or without a motive. We cannot say that, but it's extremely important for those who are consuming that information to be able to critically evaluate it and to be able to digest it in a way that's not probably going to mislead them or distort the choices that they are going to make, because a vote is something really important in a crucial context like in an election that is quite critical for democracies like ours.
Now, Deepanjalie, one thing that I see with the advent of social media is that it's difficult for the general public to figure out what are the serious issues and what are the frivolous issues. There's so much noise which drowns out the real issues. Real issues would be the economy, national security, development, human rights, women's rights, children's rights, all those aspects. Where will Sri Lanka be this time next year, this time 5 years from now? Instead, we get so much noise about who said what, why did he or she behave this way, he was late for this, what was he or she wearing, how did they behave, and so on and so forth. And in the past, before the advent of social media, journalists were the gatekeepers. We got all this frivolous information, but we filtered it. We didn't censor it. We simply gave the importance, your front page in a newspaper or the main story in your news bulletin on TV or radio. That was the most important thing which happened that day. It wasn't about who said what and who's wearing what. So the important issues got highlighted. But with social media, it's a matter of what goes viral. 500,000 people watch this particular viral video. But is that an important video? It may not be. So what's your take on the role of journalists in this context, and also this noise which has flooded us?
Absolutely. I think what you are highlighting is an important problem that we are confronted with, especially now that it's no longer the mainstream media, but also the social media and the digital sphere that we are talking about as well. So what you are saying is, in a way, this phenomenon, this problem of unmoderated media, which is, I think, relevant and applicable to both the mainstream media space and the social media space as well. As you said, there should be gatekeeping processes that are quite critical in the traditional sense of media to make sure that the information we are consuming and also publishing is quite trustworthy and credible. At the same time, the social media space has also to be moderated exactly to avoid what you're pointing out as the issues, this chaos, this noise, this clutter. And I think I'd like to approach this specific issue that you are highlighting quite importantly from two approaches. One, we can speak of the unmoderated media as this problem space, but I'd like to then move away from that and speak of social media and also the digital sphere from an opportunity space. So first, let me maybe talk about the problem space that you have also correctly identified. Like I said earlier, there's the mainstream media that tends to be not, going through those gatekeeping processes anymore, and is then also producing a lot of the information disorder that I spoke of. For example, because now we are speaking of the election as well, Ethics Eye, that I that we run as a part of Verity Media Division that I represent now. Ethics Eye is an online platform that has been there since 2016, and we have been flagging a lot of media ethical violations. And one thing that we also do around the time of elections is also to see how much airtime allocation is afforded to each of the presidential candidates. So we've seen to the extent to which some of the presidential candidates at the not just at the previously held the most recently concluded presidential election, but also in the previous ones, how certain presidential candidates got more airtime than the others. And at the same time, now we've done the same with regard to the May Day rallies that were concluded a few days back. And we see how much there is so much of coverage afforded to certain political parties over the others as well. So this is maybe one area that speaks of that mainstream media space that may not be probably going through all of those gatekeeping processes, because even if we keep that issue aside, if you look at the way some of the ethnic groups are negatively highlighted in the local media, and how women are negatively singled out, and because our focus here is also mostly the election, how there is this so much of prejudices that are perpetuated towards women political candidates that we've seen as far as in 2018 when this 25 quota was first introduced. They are quite alarming. So there are all of these issues that really negatively affect not just the vulnerable and the marginalized groups, but also certain political parties if they do not have that, maybe the affiliation with the media ownership that's giving that, you know, airtime coverage in such a way that's afforded to other political parties. So that's how we can understand that unmoderated media in the traditional sense when we speak of the mainstream media. But then there's also the social media that is also unmoderated. There's, of course, you know, this aspect of content moderation, which has also created a lot of issues around it. Once again, when there were, you know, incidents that also that were quite contentious as far as in 2018, once again, when there was violence unleashed to certain ethnic minorities in Sri Lanka, these issues of content moderation have become the focus, and they have become quite the controversy at the time as well. But when there is content moderation happening, not at that adequate or effective way, and when most of these comments that are targeting certain individuals, particularly women, negatively, not just negatively framing, but really directly harassing them, subjecting them to cyberbullying. I want to speak more, like, you know, specifically about cyberbullying here, because we did a study when there was this quota introduced in 2018 to understand the level of cyberbullying that the women political candidates were subjected to in Sri Lanka. And that was, once again, at a scale that was quite unprecedented, which I'm sure has now, you know, amplified more than that. So when there's that space which is unmoderated, which is also yielding these negative ramifications on these groups of people who don't get that voice also to really take part in the democratic discourse in a meaningful way, because it's their character that is assassinated, or it's the harassment that they are subject to in the social media space, then there's that really the aspect that we can speak as the problematic space of all of this media. But then I want to move away from that, take a step back and talk about social media also as an opportunity space, because it was not so long ago that we have seen how media in Sri Lanka has also been co-opted. And we have seen how there was the voice that was actually given to the people to raise their concerns in the mainstream media space, and also to be able to be properly informed about these issues that are being highlighted or that have been highlighted, because it's completely content that is manipulated or biased or distorted that was coming out. So the only space that the people were able to go to was the social media space for them to really, you know, be that voice, to be critical of what they were seeing, to be really holding the government and others accountable. So we can't undermine the role and the significance of the social media space and the digital sphere overall that in Sri Lanka, in countries like ours, where you can't guarantee that the mainstream media is also going to provide you with that information in that, you know, without that the noise, the chaos that you spoke of. So let me put it maybe in this way. Of course, there's toxicity that you see, like there are at least two approaches we can speak of about that unmoderated media that is applicable to both the mainstream and the social media space, where you see so much of toxicity that is used as a weapon of, let's say, like it's a weapon of control or influence. And that's where you can see all of this cyberbullying and harassment and doxing, all of these phenomena, which really do not allow that space for most of these voices, including women, to be engaging in that critical space, to be a part of that democratic discourse. Second, there's anonymity that is used as this shield for abuse, which is not something that's only prevalent to the social media space or the digital sphere. it's also something that we see in the mainstream media space. When there are articles that are going out, I know it's a tradition in Sri Lanka not to have byline in all the articles that you are going out, because there's this perception that there's this agreement that it's the editor who's ultimately responsible, right? But Ethics Eye has been flagging so many articles in the past which carry problematic content. Sometimes there has been identical content in different newspapers, whitewashing certain individuals who were prosecuted in the past. And so anonymity has been used as this shield for abuse. When you want to really engage in ad hominem attacks in the social media space, all you have to do is to create that anonymous account, and you can engage in as much ad hominem attacks that you want to. That really weaken that democratic space. So you are not only discrediting individuals, but also you are completely dilating those dissenting voices, completely disrupting the democratic space. But because we are speaking of the democratic space, we cannot overlook the role that the social media plays in a country like ours to really give us that platform to sometimes instantly hold the media accountable, the government accountable, the bureaucrats accountable, and each other accountable.
Well, certainly, Deepanjali, social media was a step forward, an information revolution, where you didn't have to wait for tomorrow's newspaper.
Yeah.
It's instant. Sometimes it's real time. You can, you see something happening on the street, you take out your smartphone and you upload it real time onto
Instantly.
Facebook and so on. Of course, there are dangers of doing that, where you might be showing, marginalized groups,
children,
and so on, or the victims of a crime. So there are issues with that, but the rapidity of dissemination certainly was good for democracy. But having said that, how does one create this awareness among the public, among the voters, as to how they should be more careful in taking in digesting all these messages which they see and hear, because as I said before, you don't have journalists as gatekeepers, and now you have all this flood of information. At the same time, no one actually teaches this method, and the method is who said what. I had a professor in university who used to, whenever we submitted an assignment or something, he would just look at it and say, okay, who said this? Who said so?
Yeah.
It's a very normal thing to ask, who said so? And of course, in academia, it's citation, which you have to do. But the lesson there is, even in real life, who said so? You can't just say, oh, I heard that so and so is doing this or has said that. But how do you get this into the minds of the general public? And I'm not talking just about Sri Lanka, but worldwide, this is an issue, isn't it?
Exactly, and I'm so glad that you put it, so succinctly. And that's exactly something Verita Media Division that I represent also has been trying to do, to really show who said this, who is this person, where is this coming from. So I have a very easy answer for you, also quite good news. We have launched this publication process called Trace It. We call it Trace It because that allows those who are in the digital sphere, who have no idea about where this content is coming from, to really be able to use this digital fingerprint, which is coming in the form of a QR code. So there's this QR code that you can easily use to be able to trace the information that you are confronted with, to know where this information came from. That is also exactly the problem that we all are grappling with. So Trace It allows this opportunity to really look at the content credentials and to go back to this original source. This is a publication process that we have actively started using in Verite, at Verite, and that's something also we think can be global, is going to be global, because in an era where there's so much of content manipulation and that phenomenon of information disorder, and when you don't know who said that, like your professor accurately asked, we are allowing this, we are providing this opportunity for reputable publishers, digital publishers also, to adopt this method, so that all they have to do is to embed that QR code and make sure that their content is traceable to the original source, so that it helps reduce this fear of being able to really digest information and trust information. Because right now what's happening is that there's so much of discouragement in the way that information is digested. But what we want to do is to really be able to enable trust around the information that people are consuming, so that they have at least that ability, which is a massive step in terms of identifying who the original source is. So that's one method. But two other approaches that Verite Media Division has also been really working on include education and empowerment. So we have been working on in terms of educating about fact-checking, about media ethical guidelines, which are globally accepted. And by educating on how a certain media outlet should be reporting on, let's say, suicide, which is always frequently discussed, and there's research that shows that when somebody who is likely to take their lives is exposed to media reporting on suicide, they are more likely to take their life. So the recommendation is that you have to publish a helpline to really help those who may be distressed, who may be in need of help, to dial that number and say that they want help because they may be depressed. There may be other psychological issues that they're grappling with. So in order to really encourage the media, the outlet, the newspapers, the journalists, the digital content creators to be ethically engaging in their profession, we have been speaking of media ethics, and it has been really effective. Although there's so much more room we have to work on in terms of getting to that, seeing those outcomes that we really want to see. There's so much of reduction in the way women have been let's say subject to negative stereotypes in media, and how certain ethnic groups are racially profiled. There's a reduction in that. So all this did not happen overnight, but as we've been working on this for years in terms of educating not just the supply side, but also the demand side. Because sometimes when there's so much of issue, to really make sure that it's the media who's ethically compliant, but when you actually make sure that you are equipping the users, the consumers, the viewers, the audience with the media ethical guidelines and critical thinking, it's them who are holding the media side accountable. I'll give you one example, quick example. So because I'm speaking of racial profiling, because it has been quite a big issue, it was so significant a few years back, and when we first talked about it, people didn't fully understand why the ethnicity of an individual should not be negatively highlighted in negative context, which is a practice that you don't see extended to someone from the, let's say, the Sinhala Buddhist background. So if it is happening to someone only from the non-Sinhala Buddhist community and in negative context, there's a problem there. And let me give you an example. Drug smuggling is a frequent example that we see in media, where it's only Muslims are negatively highlighted. So someone who tends to, let's say, exclusively maybe read a certain newspaper or consume that content through newspaper programs, where there are these programs in the morning where newspapers are read out and presented to you, they may tend to think that it's only individuals belonging to this specific ethnic background that are actually engaging in this specific activity and not others. So the media's role is not to perpetuate those prejudices, but to challenge those perceptions. So we've been problematizing this for so long, and during the period of COVID-19, some of the media channels started reporting that the spreaders of the COVID-19 virus were these individuals belonging to this specific group, this specific ethnic identity. That was something we saw in India as well. There was a parallel. But it was actually the social media users who went to Ethics Eye, took that content and held those media channels who did that, who engaged in that racial profiling, accountable. And then we saw other government agencies also issuing guidelines to journalists, specifically saying that they should not be negatively highlighting this ethnicity, ethno-religious identity, when it is not, relevant to that specific context. So that's quite, like a success story that I can share, where it was the audience or the viewers who were equipped into really consuming that content in a way, with a perspective of globally accepted media ethics, who were able to do that. So to go back to your question as to how you think we can, educate, that was your question, right? So how can that be a possibility is through education, and through education you empower the individuals, the media users, to really critically consume that information without being passive recipients of that information. And then you also are then provided with various methods and means, such as Trace It, which also help you really trace that content. So I think there are lots of avenues, alternative ways that we can explore in terms of really helping this space to be devoid of noise and chaos and clutter. And these three are steps that we have worked on and that we have seen yielding really producing quite effective results as well.
So there is good news in this area, and we will continue this discussion a little while longer, but first we'll take a short commercial break and we'll be right back.
ඔබේ ගමේ නගරේ දේශපාලනයේ හෙට දවස සතිය දිනවල සවස 6:30ට
Say something, I'm giving up on you. Whoa, sorry that I couldn't get to you.
Sajid Pushpakumara live show සඳහා සූදානම් මේ මත 17 වෙනිදා සිට සති අග සිරසේ රාත්‍රී 8:30ට සජීවීව
Red Ratmalana or WhatsApp us on 076 599 7788.
හැමතැනම කපුටු පියාට
මොකක් කපුට මැරිලා පලාතම කපුට මැරෙන සීන් එකක් තියෙන්නේ
බඩු ලොක්කා ඒක ලොක්කා කනේ දියන්න ඕනේ
කවුරුත් අපෝ ගණන් ගන්නේ නෑනේ බං
ලොක්කා ප්‍රශ්න දින උත්තර නෙමෙයි අතන
හරි මට තේරෙනවා මේක සමස්ත කපුටන් විනාශ කිරීමේ මහා කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් කුණු කැල්ලක් කන්න කපුටෙක් නැති වුණාම මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ?
හැමතැනම කුණු.
අන්න හරියට හරි. මාර විනාශයක් වෙන්නේ. මම බලා ගන්න. ඔය යන්න බලා ගන්න කියලා. බලා ගන්න.
ඔයා බලා ගන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. අපි 6 වෙනිදාට බලා ගන්නම් ඕගොල්ලෝ ගැන.
ප්‍රතිපලය බලන්න මේ 6 වෙනිදා රාත්‍රී 7:30ට සිරස TV බලන්න.
क्या करना है तो प्यार कर जिंदूरी फिर एक बार कर कमले बेकमले मन मर्जी करके देख ले बदले में सब कुछ हार कर कमले
ඉමේජ් සංදීප ලයිව් ෂෝ සඳහා සූදානම් මේ මත 17 වෙනිදා සිට සති අග සිරසේ රාත්‍රී 8:30ට සජීවීව
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am in conversation with Deepanjalie Abeywardana, head of Verite Media and Politics. Deepanjalie, now you kept referring to the media, which is something we see the world over. People say the media, but there is no one media, is it? It's diverse. You have all types of media institutions, different types of journalists. You will have journalists who have been around for 30 or 40 years, who have built up reputations, and then you've got youngsters just out of school who don't know a lot, but they're very enthusiastic and they will make a lot of mistakes. They're very impressionable. I mean, it's the same in all professions. If you take the legal profession, there's a world of difference between a young lawyer and a president's counsel. So it's all about who's most trustworthy. And again, it comes right back to who said so? Who are we listening to? Who are we watching? And in the same way, the general public gets to know or figures out each journalist, each media personality, how good they are, how bad they are, whether they have hidden agendas, and the same for different media houses as well. So if a media house has been around for 30, 40, 50 years, you know its stance on not just on politics, but on everything, whether it's women's issues, LGBTQI, and so on, and also racial issues, as you pointed out. So it's very much getting back to that awareness and who said so, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think one part of your question is whether, people can probably trust certain media houses over others because maybe there's certain brand value to them. They have been there in the industry for so long. The challenge there, I think, is twofold. One, because we are in this, era where content can be easily manipulated. You can always have imposter content where something that comes to you looks like it came from your media organization or from some other media organization, and people who tend to trust that specific brand will trust that, treating that content as authentic, but it can actually be very well manipulated content that's made to look like that it's coming from this specific media house that has this specific branding. So that's one issue.
Absolutely. We at Newsfirst have to deal with this all the time, actually, where suddenly someone will send us something content and say, what is this? And when we look at it, we know we didn't do that, and then we have to, set it right. But it's the power of branding.
Exactly. Yeah, and we can probably help you with trace it. For there, we can talk about it later. But so that's one. Second, there can also be this issue where and people should have the right to trust the information that they think is trustworthy from a specific organization, for sure. But also then at the same time, what's quite increasingly problematic is when you have certain, let's say, reputable organizations also engaging in ways that exacerbates the information disorder. So now that we speak about these world issues and how these armed conflicts and certain issues that we have seen being discussed in the world are presented to the audience with a worldview of not of that accuracy and fairness that we speak of, but also with bias. And I'm not talking about local media here. So there's the international media, which is also very much a part of the problem, that actually not, let's say, becomes a part of the solution, but actually amplifies the content that is out there and also actively really contributes to manipulating and manufacturing certain narratives that are not going to be quite helpful. So those issues are there. So despite the certain media house being there for so long, there are these other challenges that can really pose problems to the way that information is not only presented, but also the information is consumed by others. So it's I think, a two-way problem. Maybe the specific media organization is also part of the problem, as I said, and then also, even if they are not part of the problem, the way it is presented to the audience can be a problem. And because your question was about the media houses, like about who it is. There's also now we on at a surface, at a glance on the surface level, it may be that we see that there's so much of diversity in the content that we are receiving in Sri Lanka. But when you actually closely look at the media ownership, you can also see that the content that looks like it's coming from diverse sources of information is also coming from a few players who are quite dominant in that, media ownership landscape, or the media ecosystem, the information ecosystem. So all these issues, so I think it's we can't talk about that issue of whom to trust in a void, because it's in this context of all these issues that are playing a bigger role. That affects the authenticity of that information. That's really quite crucial. So that one way that I think I have to go back to the previous answer about education, empowerment, that are quite crucial in terms of helping those individuals who are receiving that information to be able to really trust that, so that it's in their hands to be able to evaluate that content and really see if this is trustworthy, rather than going by maybe a brand. Of course, the brand value plays an enormous role, but you can't just go by that, because there are so many other challenges that we are confronted with.
Absolutely. And what about the influence of artificial intelligence, AI, which is now able to do things 1,000 times faster than human beings? Yeah. So you could have 1,000 messages going out. You don't where misinformation is concerned, you don't need one person sitting there and keying it from another account. It just, it's extraordinary. Yeah. What AI can do. And also the use of proxies, in the sense, we saw this a few elections ago, yeah, where political parties, and in particular one political party, was accused of hiring a foreign firm, which worked in a very targeted manner to influence the voters. And we have seen this in the US election in a big way. Yeah. But with artificial intelligence, it's become that much tougher for people, isn't it?
Absolutely. There are at least two issues that are unique to AI that we can speak of. One, there's this ability to generate synthetic content which can mimic the human behavior. So that's the difficulty. There was this robocall in the US election that mimicked the voice of Biden, asking people not to go to vote in the primaries 2 days ahead of the election, if my memory serves right, asking them not to vote. So when there's a robocall that doesn't look like a robocall, that looks like extremely like human, then the danger and the risk there is that you tend to trust it, because you tend to trust anything like, that is related to a human. When it's coming from a human, you're more likely to trust that content. And then when it has the ability to really, let's say, prevent people from going to a polling booth, or discouraging them to vote, there's this big problem. And that's a massive danger that we have right now with AI content. And the second one is this exacerbation of this content at a scale, at an unprecedented scale. The level that we see this content being spread at a level that was not, imaginable in the past. So you can immediately put it out there in a way that can completely distort democracies, destabilize electoral processes. But once again, similar to how I talked about social media, I'd like to also speak of AI not as something to be frowned upon or not something that we should completely run away from, because that's also one way through which we can also use it to really fight the content that is manipulated. So there's that. So if you look at some of the global examples, there's this initiative by Google called Jigsaw that is using machine learning to take toxic comments, to reduce and remove toxic comments in chats, in online sphere, in online discussions. And now that's the advanced version of Trace It that I spoke of. The moment, let's say that you have this AI manipulated content, but the moment you see that it doesn't carry this QR code, let's say, that really helps you to trace where it is coming from, then, and when all the reputable digital publishers start using such a QR code that's acting like the digital fingerprint, then the users can start being really like suspicious of the content that doesn't carry such authentication. So I think it's important for us to be aware of the harms and the dangers that AI can really cause. But at the same time, AI itself can be used to really challenge and counter these as well.
Right. Now, a couple of years ago, when Elon Musk bought up Twitter and renamed it X, one of the harmful things that he did was he pretty much completely disbanded the fact-checking department of Twitter. And we have seen other companies, other social media platforms also following suit. Right now, isn't it so much easier for misinformation to be put out there because the platforms themselves are really not policing it much, is it?
I'd like to once again approach it a little differently and say that fact-checking is the responsibility of everybody. If you are a digital user, if you are a content producer, if you are just there, just to take look at entertainment content only, you are still, it's your own responsibility. It's in your hands to really be able to do your due diligence before you trust some of the content, or not some of the content that you are consuming. Therefore, what I think, if you look at the positive side of that, of course, it's quite disturbing that a lot of those who are doing fact-checking also lost their opportunities, their space because of that specific initiative. But at the same time, that encourages now everybody to also do their due diligence. So fact-checking is not something that should be unique to a certain group of individuals by profession who do that, or only for journalists to engage in fact-checking. We all are supposed to do fact-checking before we send something on WhatsApp to 15 people asking them, let's say, to eat 10 pineapples if they want to stay healthy. These are the kinds of messages you come across. So before doing any of that, before becoming that person who forwards all these unverified messages on WhatsApp or in your on other apps that you are using, it's extremely important that we do fact-checking so that we not only become digitally hygienic, but we also help others to be digitally hygienic as well.
Now, Deepanjali, one aspect I'd like you to touch on is the Online Safety Act, which is, many countries have brought in legislation to try to control what's on social media. And the Online Safety Act itself was highly criticized because it has extraordinary powers, even the trimmed down version, and now it's supposed to be amended once again. But the powers which are in the Online Safety Act have simply not been used as they were intended to. For example, we were told when this bill was brought before Parliament that this is mainly to protect the women and children. And that's not it. That's not, we in the media, we certainly challenged that assertion back then, saying, you're never going to use this, as you say you're going to use it. And that's what's happened. The Online Safety Act is really not protecting women and children, and especially when it comes to women candidates in an election.
Yes, absolutely, because I think all these proposed regulations or like attempts to regulate have to be placed in that context of larger discourse around regulation in Sri Lanka with regard to media. So my attention is not just on this specific act that you're speaking of, but overall on regulation, which cannot be completely trusted because of the experiences we have had in the past. When we look at the attempts to regulate or how regulation has come through pertaining to media in Sri Lanka in the past, they all actually raise issues and concerns. Therefore, there's this distrust associated with the state as a regulator. And also the other problem, which is also really serious here, is that the state media is also we have the state media, and when we have the state media also let's say issuing licenses or becoming a part of regulation, then who watches the watcher, who regulates the regulator? So looking at all of these issues that we have, it's really difficult to place trust in the state under any government to be the authority to really come up with regulation for media, because media is quite crucial in a democracy. And that space has to be respected, and it has to be also safeguarded, because that's where everybody gets to, not only receives information, but also be able to be a part of that democratic discourse as well. So media cannot be treated as this entity that can be just regulated for the sake of regulating. But what's really also disturbing, it has been a pattern that we have seen throughout, is that it's always the unethical media content in the mainstream media space that is taken as a justification to really come up with these regulations. So I think there's this bigger responsibility for the mainstream media space to be ethically compliant with all these media guidelines that are globally accepted. So not to avoid regulation, but they have a responsibility to be that. And at the same time, then regulation can't be proposed as something that has to be materialized in order to have that, responsible content. And at the same time, now I'm sure, those who watch this may feel that, okay, actually self-regulation in Sri Lanka has not been effective. And that's why I'm talking about this intervention of ethics with so many examples. That's why I was able to illustrate all those examples, because self-regulation has not been effective. But I don't think that alone is, again, a reason to completely dismiss self-regulation. That's also an aspect that's quite important for countries such as ours. But when we are talking about all these media ethics that people, journalists are encouraged to adhere to, it's also very important for us to keep in mind all these challenges that the journalists themselves are going through when they are producing this content. So we can't talk about self-regulation without talking about the challenges that the journalists have in that sphere. But it's also very important that we really improve the way everybody is approaching self-regulation, so that it's this important step that helps everybody produce content ethically. And apart from that, then I want to go back to that education, that the twin approach that I spoke of, education and empowerment. And this is where watchdogs such as Ethics Eye are quite important, because they give that platform, they provide that platform for those who are receiving information to be critical, to be aware and cognizant of media ethics, and to hold the media accountable. And then the media outlets also get that opportunity to educate themselves. So I think it's this multi-pronged approach that we have to look at in terms of making sure that the content we have has that trustworthiness, credibility, and that there is this overall integrity in the information ecosystem that we are a part of, without simply being dependent on regulation, which can yield a lot of negative ramifications if it's done in a way that you just spoke about.
I'm afraid we are almost out of time, but my final question is, why is it that society seems to view cyberspace as something which is different, in the sense you get quite decent individuals who would, they'd meet together, dine together, they'd be quite friendly and have civil conversations, even if they are from different parties. But then they get online and they turn into something else. It's quite shocking. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I saw a comment by a very, not a young person, a very mature gentleman who, and I was quite shocked at that. What in the world, the language he had used, the viewpoint he had expressed, which was way out, and of course when he was corrected on this, then he did delete that comment and so on. But he had to be reminded that, listen, this is not, it's not a parallel universe. You're still on planet Earth. You're still here in Sri Lanka, and you're talking about real people. So this is it's a psychological question.
Absolutely,
but why does this happen?
Yeah, I think that's partly to do with that shield I said is there. Like when you're in the cyberspace, it looks like you have suddenly this shield that you can use for abuse.
But you don't actually have it, because it's your Facebook account, it's your Twitter account.
Exactly. I don't think I have a very good answer to that, but it's quite disturbing. I agree that what you are witnessing is something that we are witnessing on a day-to-day basis, sadly as well. And then women are, they become more victimized in such a cyberspace. But can I also really quickly add something to this, now that we are speaking of women and cyberspace, and we have the election in a few hours. So we all know that there's a 25% of quota that's introduced for the women at the local government election.
Which is very important.
But which is also not going to really solve the problem. So there are two problems that Verite has talked about even in 2018, and that we want to talk about again in the context of this election. One, the mandate for electing women through wards is quite low, and it is at 10%, and the proportional representation does not guarantee that they will be elected despite them having that 50%. And the second problem is that these smaller political parties are exempted from fulfilling this quota. So for example, if they get only 20%, less than 20% of votes, this isn't mandatory. It isn't mandatory for them to respect that 25% of quota. So let me go back to your question on, now that I had to speak of cyber bullying, because it prompted me to also share this data with you. One specific problem with that behavior that you're pointing out can also be once again attributed to lack of digital hygiene. They may very well be this decent person that you're interacting offline, but in the online space, they may not be fully aware of how they should be conducting themselves in a way that minimizes harm, damage, and also adhere to those community guidelines that we all are governed by if we are social media users, and also that doesn't to help them think that this is actually not a space that gives you a license to behave in this problematic way. So it all comes down to education, and this is why I want to stress about education, empowerment, and the interventions that we are doing through EthicsEye, factcheck.lk, and Trace It. So that what we try to do is to encourage these individuals in the cyberspace to be dignified individuals rather than, behaving in the way that you described.
Deepanjalie Abeywardana, Head of Verite Media and Politics and Deputy Director of Verite Research, thank you very much for being with us this evening. And thank you to you at home for watching. And my final thoughts are, get out there tomorrow and vote. You may not have a preferred candidate. You may not even know who your candidates are at all. But get out there and make your vote count. But remember to think hard about what you see, what you hear, and what you know before you take that decision. And basically, vote wisely. Thank you very much for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.